We're joined now by JAVED Rana, expert on political and geostrategic issues. JAVED, thanks for coming onto the programme. Now, we have heard from a stringer on the ground, and he suggested that New Zealand is not a place that you associate with this kind of incident. How big a shock is this for the people of New Zealand?
I think it is a shock, maybe for the people in New Zealand, but it's not a big shock for people elsewhere in the world. I'm specifically referring about the Muslim elsewhere in the world, because these kind of incidents have been happening over the years in a world where more than 900 think tanks are working to portray Muslims as terrorists, as militants, as jingoistic. So these kind of attacks, I think one should not be very much surprised. So I think it is the hard work of these think tanks. It is the hard work of CIA, which they had a lot of investment in portraying Muslims as terrorists in the Middle East, particularly when the CIA was involved, when the British intelligence agencies were involved in propping up Daesh, so-called Islamic State, and the way they were beheading non-Muslims. That was a message to all the non-Muslims elsewhere in the world that the Muslims are jingoistic, they are barbarian. So this kind of reaction would certainly take place. We need to see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is what Donald Trump said before becoming president, that the then President Obama was the commander-in-chief of the Daesh. That actually reflects the policy of the West in propping up all these kind of elements which are now portraying Muslims as terrorists. And this is that kind of reaction. And this is a combination of sort of racism and Islamophobia, which is at the heart of the problem. There has been significant rise of such incidents in the UK and particularly in the US. And many incidents go unreported. People are routinely stabbed. And if you look at in South Asia, here hundreds of houses of Muslims are burned by the Hindu nationalists, by the Hindu extremists. But these are least reported, and even if these are reported, there's a least prosecution against these people. So I'm not surprised.
But Javed, the fact is they are surprised in New Zealand. They're not, they haven't experienced this kind of incident before. And there are also reports that a suspect posted pictures of his weapons on Twitter 3 days ago. So obviously little bits of information are coming out at the moment. And he says the report suggested that he was planning an attack. In your opinion, were there any warning signs missed?
I think obviously, if you look at the smaller picture, which is in New Zealand, these kind of incidents never happened there. So there is an element of worry and there is an element of surprise, but that surprise is only confined to the New Zealand. Now, authorities should have been far more active. They should have got hold of this terrorist, which unfortunately did not happen. But nonetheless, it's all over. Now, it's a high time to actually, this image building, this fake image building, that needs to be sort of repaired in a manner that the Muslims, all Muslims are not terrorists, all Muslims, they don't belong to Daesh, they have no linkages with them. These were the terrorists which were propped up by the Americans, by the British, and because of that image, I think, has been at the heart of the problem. And then you might have seen these Western news channels, and not particularly this incident. Generally, they say it is a gun battle, it is an attack. They don't call it terrorism. Now, anything which happens in Muslim countries where Muslims are attackers, that becomes terrorism. This is not being treated as a terrorism, and that is a very unfortunate part of the overall picture.
Javed, if we look at the power of social media, because if those reports are true and there were signs or warnings with the planning of this attack, and you look at, again, we look at the country New Zealand, a quieter country that hasn't experienced this before, whose responsibility is it to catch these signs? Should the security forces be acting straight away when they see any element of a sign or a warning like this?
They should have acted in advance, as I explained earlier on. But at the same time, it is also the responsibility of the social media managers, these Facebook, why this post was still there. I mean, this should have been removed after being intimated by the authorities. In this particular case, that has not happened. This is very unfortunate. I mean, there has to be a sort of preemptive action against these kind of terrorists, which unfortunately is missing. And I think part of the reason is that New Zealand never thought that these kind of incidents can happen in their country. Since this has happened, now they need to look up and prevent such incidents to happen again in the future. And that is at the heart of the problem. And if people think that for the time being Muslim would stop going to the mosque in New Zealand or elsewhere, that's not going to happen. My understanding of the Muslim is that they are fearless. They will go to the mosque wherever they are. And if these incidents certainly is a sign of scare for them, but the kind of the belief system that they have, they would keep on going in the mosque and will keep on going with their worship.
Well, Javed, we don't know that that's going to happen. I mean, it could be an isolated incident, couldn't it? It could be just a few disturbed individuals who have acted in this case in New Zealand. So do you think this attack could be written off if that was the case?
I think in a world which we call global world, social media is so active. I mean, people watch television everywhere in the world. So nothing happened in the world as an isolated incident. I think what happened in Middle East, what happened in Syria, what happened in Iraq, I think those images did reach New Zealand. And that is a reaction to that kind of those horrible images. And as I explained early on, and there was purely intelligence network which was behind these beheading of non-Muslims in the Middle East. And then I think in a broader picture, we should not see it as an incident happening only in New Zealand. These are very much connected with what is happening in the UK, with what is happening in the US. You look at the reports, there are thousands of incidents of stabbing, thousands of incidents where these kind of attacks happen on Muslim worship places. So I think if we see it, that it was an isolated incident in New Zealand and let's ignore it, I think we should not ignore it, because New Zealand is linked with elsewhere with other parts of the world, and it is not geographical linkages. It is what we see on the television. It is what we see on the social media, and the fact that the terrorists portray all these images on the social media, that reflects a network. That means that there is an element of acceptability by the people that they want to see these kind of images. So unfortunately, these racism, this Islamophobia, partially this has some sort of acceptability in parts of the New Zealand, and that is why incidents like these have happened.
Javed, you've mentioned Connect, and we are speculating. We have to stress this because obviously the police are hard at work in New Zealand and they don't know for sure what the motivations were exactly, or indeed how many people have been involved. So you've mentioned that you think that there was a connection between New Zealand and UK and that it's not isolated incidents. I mean, how should the world be reacting? Because should they be living in fear? Should all Muslims be living in fear, if that's the case? Or, I mean, what should countries and governments be doing?
I think Muslims are quite used to these kind of incidents, and going by their belief system, they are least scared of incident like this. But certainly, this is a matter of concern for the security forces everywhere in the world, particularly in the Western countries. They need to look at what they have done with the previous incident of this nature. What is the number of the successful prosecution in these cases? Probably that is where they need to look at, and that is a bigger picture. And I think more importantly, again, we need to look at what more than 900 think tanks are doing everywhere in the world. They are trying to portray Muslims as militant. They are trying to portray Muslims that they are a threat to the Western civilization. And nonetheless, Islam has turned out to be the fastest spreading religion in the world, particularly in the UK. So why Islam is spreading if the Muslims are so horrible? So that means there is something which the West is concealing. And there is something the West is trying to portray to the world, that Islam is horrible, which I believe certainly is not the case.
OK, Javed, we're going to leave it there. We've talked for a long time. And thank you very much for coming onto the programme and airing your views on this horrific incident. JAVED Rana, expert on political and geostrategic issues. Thank you.